I already knew how the day would end. That's the strange part. Standing there, with my hands folded too tightly in front of me, suit sleeves brushing against strangers I didn't know. I already knew who would leave the room early, who would avoid eye contact, and which smiles would never quite come back the same after that afternoon. But no one else did. Not yet. The music swelled the way it always does, at weddings practiced, hopeful, carefully timed to cue emotion on command. Chairs scraped softly as everyone stood. Phones lifted, breath held. My daughter was already at the altar. White dress, straight posture, calm face. Too calm, I remember thinking. I was supposed to be watching her back, the way fathers usually do. Instead, I was watching from the side, half hidden behind a pillar, standing where the lighting was worst and the camera angles wouldn't linger, because I wasn't supposed to be there. Then she turned, not toward the man waiting to marry her, not toward the officiant, holding the binder with their names printed neatly on the cover. She turned her head just enough for her eyes to find mine, and she didn't look surprised. She looked resolved. For a heartbeat, no one noticed. The music kept playing. The guests were too focused on the expected moment, the vow, the handoff, the rehearsed sequence they'd all come to see. Then my daughter stepped off the aisle, one heel, then the other. The first whisper cut through the music like a blade. What is she doing? I felt every eye begin to shift, row by row, the way wind moves through tall grass. The groom's smile faltered. The officiant stopped turning pages, and I stood there, frozen, because I finally understood this wasn't a mistake. 3 days earlier, I'd received a message from my daughter. No greeting, no explanation, just a single line that didn't feel like an invitation so much as a warning. Please come, sit in the back. That was it. No heart emoji, no I miss you, just instructions. I'd read it at my kitchen table, phone glowing against a surface that still had her childhood scratches etched into it. I remember thinking how carefully the words were chosen. Not if you come. Not I want you there. Please come. As if she knew I wouldn't want to. As if she knew exactly how complicated my presence had become. Back in the ceremony, her steps were slow, deliberate. Every footfall echoed louder than it should have. The music stumbled, a half-second lag as the musicians tried to decide whether to keep going or stop. The man beside her, the one she was supposed to walk toward, went pale. He knew. I saw it in his face before anyone else did. A tightening around the eyes. A calculation. The quiet terror of someone realizing a script has been altered and they're no longer in control of the scene. My daughter stopped directly in front of me. So close I could see the faint tremor in her hands. So close I could smell her perfume, the same one she used to steal from her mother when she was 16. The room had gone completely silent. No music, no whispers, just breathing. And then she did something no one could undo. But before I tell you what that was, you need to understand why my being there mattered at all. Because this wasn't about tradition. It was about absence. I hadn't walked her through most of her adult life. Not physically. I'd been there when she graduated, when she moved apartments, when she needed a cosigner she didn't want to ask for. But emotionally, something had shifted years ago. Quietly, without a fight, without a clean break that could be explained at family gatherings. I wasn't disowned. I wasn't forgiven either. I'd received the wedding invitation late, not with the others, not in the embossed envelope everyone talked about. Mine came folded, plain, addressed in handwriting that wasn't hers. There was no seat assignment, just a time, a place, and a note at the bottom that read, "Please be respectful of the day," as if my existence itself required a disclaimer. I almost didn't go. Standing there now, watching my daughter in a room full of people who thought they understood her story better than I did, I wondered if that would have been easier for everyone. But she hadn't asked me to stay away. She'd asked me to come. And now, with every guest watching and every assumption hanging thick in the air, she reached out toward me, not with her hands, not yet, but with her eyes, a look that said, "Stay," because what was about to happen wasn't an accident. It was a correction. And once it began, there was no version of the day where the truth stayed buried. I thought I was there to witness her wedding. I was wrong. I was there because she had finally decided to interrupt the story everyone else had been telling and replace it with one they couldn't ignore. And that interruption started with me. Long before there was a wedding, before there were invitations and seating arrangements and quiet warnings disguised as politeness, I was the one who always showed up early. That's the role I fell into without realizing it. The steady presence, the background constant, the one who didn't need applause, the one who fixed things before they broke, or at least tried to. When my daughter was 7, she broke her arm, falling off a neighbor's fence. I was out of town for work, 3 states away. I drove through the night and made it to the hospital before visiting hours ended. She was asleep when I arrived, her cast still warm, her fingers twitching like she was dreaming. I sat there until morning, because leaving felt wrong. When she was 13 and decided she hated piano, I didn't argue. I sold the keyboard, signed her up for art classes instead, and told her she didn't owe anyone consistency at that age. When she was 19 and called me crying from a parking lot because she'd locked her keys in the car and didn't want to bother anyone, I didn't ask why she hadn't called sooner. I drove 40 minutes, no lecture. I was always careful like that, not to demand, not to push. I thought that was love. Somewhere along the way, that quiet presence became easy to overlook. Her mother and I divorced when my daughter was in high school. No affair, no dramatic courtroom battle, just 2 people who realized they had become better co-parents than partners. At least, that's how I saw it. Her mother remarried quickly. A man who spoke confidently, laughed loudly, and filled silences before anyone else had the chance. He was good at first impressions, good at being seen. He took over the school events, the conversations with teachers, the visible parts of parenting. I didn't fight him for space. I didn't think it mattered. That was my first mistake. At some point, I still can't pinpoint when the narrative shifted. Small comments, casual phrases, nothing aggressive, just reframing. You know how your dad is. He means well. He's just not very involved. I heard those words secondhand, months or years later, always followed by reassurance that no one meant anything by it. I believed them. I worked more. I stayed flexible. I told myself that love didn't need to be loud to be real. But absence has a way of being rewritten. When my daughter moved out after college, she didn't ask me to help. When she got her first real job, she told me weeks later. When she started dating the man who would become her husband, I heard about him through a family group chat I wasn't very active in anymore. Still, I didn't push. She never told me she was angry. She never told me she was hurt. She just stopped asking. And I told myself that meant she was okay. The first time I realized something was wrong was the engagement. She called me that night. Short call, nervous energy, told me the news. I congratulated her, asked how she felt. There was a pause. Then she said, "I'm happy, I think." I wanted to ask more. I didn't. Later, I saw the photos online. A restaurant, candles, her mother and stepfather in the background, arms around the couple, smiling, like this was something they'd planned together. I wasn't in the frame. Again, I told myself it didn't matter. The wedding planning happened mostly without me. I wasn't excluded outright. That would have been easier to address. I was just uninvolved. Updates came filtered. Decisions already made. Information passed along like an afterthought. When I asked about walking her down the aisle, she hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "We'll figure it out," she said. We never did. By the time the invitation arrived, the plain one, I understood what that hesitation had meant. I wasn't being punished. I was being managed. Someone had decided what role I was allowed to play, and it was easier for everyone if I accepted it quietly. The man who had helped shape that version of me sat in the front row on the wedding day. Confident posture, easy smile, one hand resting on my daughter's mother's knee like he belonged there. People greeted him warmly, asked him how he felt, told him how proud he must be. No one asked me anything, and I stood in the back, exactly where I'd been placed, wondering when not making a fuss had turned into consent. 3 days before the wedding, when my daughter's message came through, I stared at it for a long time. "Please come, sit in the back." It didn't read like an apology. It didn't read like reconciliation. It read like preparation. I typed and erased a dozen responses, questions I wanted to ask, explanations I wanted to give. Then I deleted everything and wrote, "Okay," because whatever she was doing, she didn't want words. Not yet. The day of the wedding, I arrived early. I always do. Old habit. I stood outside the venue and watched guests file in, laughing, dressed up, certain they were about to witness something simple and beautiful. Inside, I found my place without being guided. No usher stopped me. No one asked my name. I blended into the background exactly as intended. From there, I could see everything. I saw the groom adjusting his cufflinks, glancing at the front row for reassurance. I saw my daughter's mother dabbing at her eyes before the ceremony even began. I also saw the way my daughter avoided looking toward the back as she took her place at the altar. Not because she didn't care, because she was trying not to give anything away. That's when it occurred to me, standing there, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't fully explain, that my daughter wasn't conflicted. She was composed. Whatever story had been built around me, whatever assumptions had calcified over the years, she had already reached a conclusion of her own. She just hadn't shared it yet. And as the music started and everyone stood, I realized something else, something colder and more unsettling. The people who believed they understood our family best were about to learn how wrong they'd been. Because when someone spends years quietly giving, quietly stepping aside, quietly trusting that the truth will speak for itself, the truth doesn't disappear. It waits, and when it finally shows up, it doesn't do so politely. It interrupts. The first real fracture didn't arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived disguised as politeness. About a week after the engagement party, the one I hadn't been invited to but had watched unfold through other people's photos, my daughter called me late in the evening. Her voice sounded measured, like she was reading from something she'd already rehearsed in her head. "I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said, "so nothing feels awkward later." That word again, awkward. I asked her what she meant. There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough to tell me she was choosing her next sentence carefully. "Well," she said, "Mom and Richard have been really involved in the planning. They've taken on a lot." I pictured Richard immediately, sleeves rolled up, voice loud, presence undeniable. The kind of man who fills space effortlessly and assumes it was always meant for him. "That's fine," I said. "It's your wedding." She exhaled, relief evident in the sound, as if she'd been bracing for resistance that never came. "Thank you for understanding," she said. Understanding, another word people use when they want permission without negotiation. After that call, things didn't explode. They narrowed. Information stopped flowing naturally and started arriving in fragments. Decisions were already finalized by the time they reached me, presented as facts instead of conversations. The florist was booked. The venue was locked. The guest list was tight. Every update came with a tone that suggested efficiency, not collaboration. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I told myself that staying flexible was still the right thing to do. But flexibility, when it's one-sided, turns into erasure. A month later, my daughter asked to meet for coffee. She arrived 10 minutes late, phone in hand, distracted but polite. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, weather, work, traffic, before she pulled up a seating chart on her screen. "I just wanted to show you where everyone's sitting," she said, scrolling quickly. Names passed in neat rows. Friends, family, colleagues. Her mother's side took up most of the front. Richard's name appeared prominently beside her mother's. I searched quietly, found myself back row, far edge, a single seat, no +1, no proximity to anyone I knew. I waited for her to notice me noticing. She didn't. I said nothing. She smiled, finished her coffee, and said she had to run. That silence followed me home. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that echoes. A week later, my sister called me. She hesitated before speaking, which told me everything. "I don't want to be the one to tell you this," she said, "but people are saying Richard's walking her down the aisle." I felt the words land, heavy and unreal. "I didn't know that," I said. "You should talk to her," she suggested gently. When I did, my daughter didn't deny it. She didn't explain it either. She just said, "He's been there for me. A lot." I wanted to ask when. I wanted to ask how. I wanted to ask why being quietly consistent for years had somehow become less valuable than being visibly present at the right moments. But I didn't. I told her again that it was her day. She thanked me again. That was the pattern I offered grace, and it was accepted like entitlement. The deeper humiliation came later. 2 months before the wedding, her mother hosted a planning dinner. Family only. That was how it was described afterward. I wasn't invited. I didn't hear about it until the next morning, scrolling through photos someone else had posted. Everyone was there. Every sibling, every cousin, even the groom's parents, who had flown in early. The table was long, crowded, loud with conversation and wine glasses. Richard stood at the head in one photo, raising a glass, smiling broadly. The caption read, "Couldn't have done this without you." It felt deliberate. That night, my daughter texted me, "Sorry you couldn't make it. It was last minute." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put my phone down and didn't answer. For the first time, I let the silence exist without trying to soften it. That silence stretched. Days passed, then weeks. When we spoke again, something fundamental had shifted. The warmth was gone, replaced by politeness, careful distance, as if I'd failed a test I hadn't known I was taking. I began hearing things indirectly, that I was hard to read, that I kept my distance, that I didn't seem very invested. The irony of it almost made me laugh. I had spent years believing that love spoke for itself. What I didn't realize was that silence doesn't read as humility from the outside. It reads as absence. The rehearsal dinner confirmed it. I wasn't invited. No call, no message, no explanation. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my hotel room, jacket still hanging untouched, tie folded neatly on the dresser like an artifact from a role I was no longer meant to play. Outside the window, the city glowed softly. People moved through the streets below, laughing, unaware that somewhere above them, a father was deciding whether to disappear quietly from his own daughter's story. I thought about leaving, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Then, at 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my daughter. "Please come. Sit in the back." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just that same sentence again. I read it over and over. This time, it didn't feel dismissive. It felt intentional. The morning of the wedding, I dressed slowly, carefully, as if the details still mattered, even if no one would notice. At the venue, I slipped in early. No usher stopped me. No one greeted me. I took my place exactly where I'd been instructed. From there, I could see everything. I saw Richard holding court near the front row, laughing, shaking hands, accepting congratulations like they were owed. I saw guests treating him like the father of the bride, asking him how proud he must be. He didn't look at me, not once. And I realized something chilling. He didn't think I mattered anymore. To him, I was already written out. The ceremony began. Guests stood. Music swelled. My daughter walked down the aisle and took her place at the altar. She didn't look back. At least, not yet. Then she turned. Everything you already know followed. Her eyes found mine. She stepped off the aisle. The whispers started. But here's what no one else understood in that moment. When she reached me, she didn't hesitate. She reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying for months, the one I'd never planned to show anyone. The room shifted. I felt it, like air pressure changing. Richard stiffened. He knew that envelope. Inside it was not money, not a note. It was documentation, proof, records that showed exactly who had been there quietly, consistently when it actually mattered, and who hadn't. My daughter turned back toward the altar, envelope in her hands, shoulders squared. She took a breath, and in that instant, I understood something that hurt more than everything that had come before. She hadn't needed time to decide. She had needed proof. Because for years, she had been told a story about me, and now she was about to correct it. Now, if any part of this story is hitting close to home for you, you're not alone. You can tap like to let me know it resonated, and if you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe and stick around for the rest of the story. The room waited. Every assumption hung in the air, brittle now. Richard's confidence drained from his face, replaced by calculation. Because he understood something the others didn't yet. The story he thought he'd already won was about to be told again. The room didn't erupt the way people imagine moments like that do. There was no gasp, no collective intake of breath, just a strange, fragile stillness, the kind that happens when everyone senses something important is unfolding, but no one knows where to look yet. My daughter stood facing the altar, envelope held against her chest. Her fingers curled tightly around the edges, as if it might slip away if she loosened her grip. The officiant glanced toward the front row, unsure whether to intervene or wait for instruction. The musicians sat frozen, bows hovering just above strings. Richard shifted first. It was subtle, a half step forward, a straightening of the shoulders, but it was unmistakable. A reflex, the instinct of someone used to taking control when things deviate from plan. "Sweetheart," he said, voice low but firm, pitch just loud enough to carry. "Maybe we should." She didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge him at all. Instead, she looked down at the envelope in her hands, took another breath, and then looked back out at the room. Her gaze moved slowly, deliberately, across faces she'd known her whole life, and faces she'd only met through this wedding. "I need to pause for a moment," she said. Her voice didn't shake. That was the first sign that this wasn't impulse. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't a breakdown. It was preparation. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the second row glanced at their phone, then thought better of it. Her mother leaned forward slightly, brows drawn together, confusion and concern fighting for dominance on her face. Richard didn't sit back down. He stayed standing, hands clasped in front of him now, posture composed, but eyes alert, watchful in the way someone gets when they sense a threat but haven't yet identified its shape. My daughter continued. "I know this isn't traditional," she said, "and I know some of you might be wondering what's going on." A ripple moved through the room, not sound, but recognition. The acknowledgement that yes, this was happening, and no, it wasn't part of the program. She glanced briefly in my direction, just long enough to anchor herself. Then she lifted the envelope. "This," she said, "is something I was given a long time ago." Richard's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what it was. Not the contents, not yet, but the implication. The fact that something had existed outside his awareness, outside his control. She turned slightly, angling her body so everyone could see. "For years," she continued, "I believed a version of my family that made sense to me at the time. A version where the people who showed up loudly were the ones who cared the most." 2. Within 2010, that landed, not as accusation, as observation. Her mother inhaled sharply. I saw it from the corner of my eye, the reflexive response of someone who suddenly realizes they're being spoken about, not to. My daughter didn't look at her. "I was told things," she said calmly. "Not directly, not all at once, just enough, over time, to shape how I saw someone who mattered to me." Her fingers tightened around the envelope. "And I didn't question it," she said, "because it was easier not to." The room was utterly silent now. Even Richard had stopped trying to insert himself. 3 months ago," she said, "I asked for proof." That word cut cleanly through the air. Proof. She opened the envelope, not dramatically, not all at once. She removed the contents slowly, deliberately, as if giving the moment the weight it deserved. Inside were copies, not originals, of documents she'd asked me to bring months earlier. Hospital records, payment confirmations, emails, dates highlighted, notes in the margins written in my handwriting. Evidence of presence. Not flashy, not sentimental, irrefutable. She held them up just enough for the front rows to see. "These," she said, "are receipts, not for money, for time." A murmur rippled through the guests, not loud, but unmistakable. The sound people make when a story they thought they understood begins to fracture. "I didn't ask for these because I wanted to embarrass anyone," she continued. "I asked because I needed to know whether the picture I'd been shown was complete." Richard finally spoke. "This really isn't the time," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We can talk about this later." She turned to face him then, not angrily, not tearfully. "Level. No," she said. "We can't." That single word carried more authority than any raised voice could have. "For years," she said, still looking at him, "you told me who was there for me, who I could count on, who made the effort." She paused. "You never thought I'd check." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. His confidence faltered, just for a moment, and in that crack, the truth slipped through. This wasn't about love. It was about authorship. He had been writing a version of events where he was central, indispensable, heroic. And now, in front of everyone, the draft was being rejected. My daughter turned back to the room. "I'm not saying anyone here is a villain," she said. "I'm saying I was wrong to accept a story without asking the person it was about." Her gaze found mine again. "This man," she said, "was told to stay quiet. And he did. Not because he didn't care, but because he thought respecting my choices mattered more than defending himself." My throat tightened. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. "And I let that silence mean something it didn't," she said. She folded the papers carefully and placed them back into the envelope, then closed it. "I'm done with that," she said simply. Her mother stood up. "Honey," she said, voice strained, "this isn't fair. You don't know how hard we tried." My daughter raised her hand. Not aggressively, just enough. "I know," she said, "and I also know what wasn't said." End quote. Her mother sat back down. The damage wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. My daughter took a step back toward the aisle, then stopped. "There's one more thing," she said. This was the moment the room leaned forward without realizing it. She turned fully toward me. "Dad," she said. She hadn't called me that in a long time. "I'm not asking you to fix the past," she said. "I'm asking you to stand with me now." Every eye followed her gaze. Tradition dictates a single escort, a clear role, a neat story. She wasn't interested in neat anymore. "Will you walk with me?" she asked. "Not give me away. Walk with." I felt the weight of the room press in, but I didn't look anywhere except at her. I nodded. Once, that was enough. As I stepped forward, Richard finally understood. Not that he'd lost, but that he'd been misjudging the entire game. This wasn't revenge. It was revision. And revisions don't ask permission from the original author. As I took my place beside my daughter, I saw it in his face. The moment realization curdled into regret. Too late. The ceremony resumed, but it was altered now, charged, alive in a way it hadn't been before, because everyone in that room had just learned something important. Quiet people aren't empty. They're full of things they didn't feel safe saying. And sometimes, all it takes is one person deciding to listen. The ceremony finished, the way ceremonies always do, vows spoken, rings exchanged, applause rising on cue, but nothing about it felt routine anymore. The room had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but permanently. As my daughter and I walked the remaining steps together, I could feel the eyes on us, not curious now, not judgmental, but recalibrating. People were quietly reassembling the story in their heads, slotting new information into places that had once felt settled. Some smiled at us as we passed, others didn't. A few looked away. That was fine. Truth doesn't require unanimous approval. At the altar, I stepped back when it was time, not because I was dismissed, but because I was done. My role wasn't to be seen beside her forever. It was to be acknowledged honestly. She squeezed my hand once before letting go. That single gesture undid me more than anything else that day. The reception carried on in a familiar rhythm, speeches, laughter, clinking glasses, but the undercurrent had changed. Conversations fractured into smaller, quieter clusters. People chose their words more carefully. Richard stayed near his seat for most of it. He didn't leave immediately. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he lingered just long enough to maintain appearances, his posture rigid, his smile practiced but brittle. No one congratulated him anymore. They congratulated the couple. They congratulated my daughter's mother. A few even came up to me awkwardly, tentatively, and said things like, "That took courage," or "I didn't know." I thanked them politely and moved on. I wasn't interested in vindication. The most telling moment came during the speeches. Richard had prepared one. I knew that much. I'd seen the note cards earlier, tucked neatly into his jacket pocket. When the time came, he didn't stand. He waited. Someone else spoke instead, then another. By the time it would have been his turn, the moment had passed. He slipped the cards back into his pocket and sat there, applause washing over him without ever landing. Later, I noticed his seat was empty. He'd left quietly. No confrontation, no goodbye, just absence. My daughter's mother approached me near the dessert table, eyes tired, expression guarded. "I didn't know," she said. I believed her, at least partially. "I should have asked more questions," she added. "Yes," I said. That was all. Some apologies don't need to be expanded. They just need to be acknowledged and then left alone. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The phone rang more often. Not constantly, not desperately, just naturally. My daughter called to tell me about small things, a new routine, a minor argument, a moment that made her laugh. Things she used to share only with others. We met for lunch one afternoon, no agenda, no subtext, just food and conversation. At one point, she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask you sooner." I nodded. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up," I replied. Neither of us tried to assign blame beyond that. Some damage doesn't need to be excavated to heal. It just needs air. Richard didn't resurface in our lives. There was no dramatic fallout, no grand reckoning. He simply faded. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd been hurt by what happened, that he felt undermined. That was his language to manage. Not mine. The story had corrected itself without my interference. That's the part people often miss. Quiet truth doesn't chase validation. It waits until it's asked for. Months later, my daughter and I stood together again, this time in my kitchen. She was flipping through an old photo album, pausing on moments she barely remembered. "You were there a lot," she said softly. I smiled. "I tried to be," I said. She closed the album. "I see it now." That was enough. We didn't fix the past. We stopped lying about it, and that changed everything. Because love doesn't need to be loud to be real. It just needs to be honest. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been quietly present, quietly giving, quietly misunderstood, take a moment to like this video. It helps more than you think. And if you want to hear more stories like this, where patience meets truth and silence finally gets its voice, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's another story coming, and it's already unfolding. All bitter revenge, where arrogance meets consequences. And every story ends with poetic justice and quiet, unforgettable karma.